I'm Margaret Lewin and welcome to Margaret Lewin Quilting. Today I have a brand new quilt to share with you, and what we're going to be working on today is making our big blocks and making our little blocks. Now, my little blocks aren't done. You can see they aren't pressed, they aren't trimmed, they're nothing at this stage. So that means that part 2 will show us how to trim these up and how we're going to put it all together. It is randomly put on the board right now because I don't want to give the design away. I want you to come back and see part 2. So here comes part 1 of how I put these blocks together, and I hope you enjoy. It's time to get started on our next quilt project. What I used was Mixology's 10-inch squares, and what I did to start with is I cut all of the layer cake up into 5-inch squares. So I took each piece, cut it in half and then in half again, so I ended up with a whole bunch of 5-inch squares. The next thing that I did was I took my background fabric and I cut that up into 7.5-inch squares. Once I did that, then I took my pen, as you can see, and I measured from one corner to the other of my 5.5-inch square, of my 5-inch square, and I drew a line. Then I measured 1/2 of an inch out from that and drew a second line. Now you can see me placing my 5-inch squares on top of my background fabric. One of the things that you want to make certain of is that your shorter line, or your line that is away from the center, is pointed down towards the corner and not towards the center of your block. So you're going to do that on every single one of your blocks. You're going to put one on each corner. I found it easiest to go ahead and prepare all of these prior to taking them over to the sewing machine, because then I could just continuously sew, which I found really, really easy. If I got a couple of minutes, I'd sew a few of them and then move on. So that's how I suggest you do it. Just make certain that your shorter line is always pointed out towards the corner and not towards the center of your block. It's time to start stitching. And one of the things that's different about this quilt than many of the quilts that we're used to is we always seem to sew 1/4 of an inch from the line that we've drawn. This time what we're going to be doing is sewing each block right on the line that we drew. So we're actually going to be putting these blocks underneath our presser foot 4 times because each block has 4 lines drawn on it. But like I said before, it's really fast and easy sewing. You're just sewing on a drawn line, which means that you can sew one right after the other, which is exactly what I'm doing here. I did start out sewing the 2 outside lines, then I sewed the 2 inside lines, and again, just one right after the other. So I'll let you watch me sew a few of them, and then we'll move on to the next step. We're getting down to the end of our pile, and the only thing I would caution you on is to make certain that your other 5-inch square that's diagonally from the one you're sewing is not underneath your presser foot. I did find that every once in a while I would have to stop and clip, or stop and actually move a piece of fabric so that it didn't get sewn down where it wasn't supposed to. So here we go. I'm just about finishing up here. And I do want you to know that what I did was I sewed about 10 of them at a time. And once I'd sewn the 10, I would take them off, which you can see that I'm doing here, taking all my pins out. And then I would cut my squares. Now, how I did that was, and I'm going to show you here in just a second, what you're going to be doing is cutting in between your sewn lines on each of your 5-inch squares. Okay, so here I have all of my pieces sewn. And I'm thinking you can see these two lines, but you may not be able to see these because the fabric's a little bit darker. So now that I've gotten these sewn, you can see them here, I'm going to just cut with my scissors, or if you want, you could, take them to your cutting table and do that. But I'm just going to sit right here and cut these two in the center. And remember, because we moved the mark, or we marked a 1/2 of an inch away from our first drawn line, that way we've got about 1/4 of an inch seam. So now I'll cut this one. And the only thing you want to be careful is that this extra piece of fabric doesn't end up in there. And I just pick it up and just cut it with my scissors. I think it's easier, and I think it's a little bit faster than lining it up with the ruler and using the roller blade, or the blade. So here's our block. Now when you go to press this, remember you want to press it away from the white, because that fabric, as you can see right here, will definitely show through. So you're going to want to press your two seams out just like this, all right? And then here's my two extras, and I'm going to show you in a few minutes what we're going to do with these. Do you remember all those small 1/2 square triangles that we ended up making when we made our large blocks? Well, that's what I have here. So your next step of what you need to do is you need to press all of these, and you need to press them with the fabric towards the colored fabric. So what we're going to do is just press these over. So here I go. I'm going to start, as I try to always do, by setting my seams. Then once I set my seam, I'm going to pick up my fabric, and I'm just going to press it towards the printed fabric. I'm going to do that on all of my 1/2 square triangles. Then once I've done that, I need to find a different color here so I can show you what I'm going to do next. Let's see, is that a solid? Yep, that's a solid. I want a color. All right, I'm going to grab this one right here. So once you've done that, I'm going to do one more of them. And then I'm going to grab one of my friction pens, and I'm going to show you the next step. All right, so your next step is you're going to grab a friction pen, and this is my 2.5 by 18.5 inch Creative Grids ruler. This is the one I keep right next to my sewing machine. It comes in handy quite a bit. So I'm going to take my friction pen, and I'm going to draw a line diagonally on this, right across that seam. All right. Well, it's still too hot. I gotta wait a second. So I'm drawing that line right across. Once I've done that, I'm gonna grab my other 1/2 square triangle, and I'm just gonna butt these two seams right together close like this, okay? Once I get them butted together close, I'm gonna pin them. And how I'm gonna pin them is so that I am running the machine through this way. The reason for that is because if I stitch this way, when I come up against this, it will push those two seams together. So whenever I can, when I'm piecing something, sew across the seam this way, I do, because it does help keep my corners together. So now that I've pinned this together, I'm going to take it over the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch from each line. Then once I've done that, I'm going to cut these in half, and then I will have a piece that looks just like this. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. If you would like to make this quilt along with me, out on my website, you can find the layer cakes. It's called Basic Mixology, and it is by Studio M for Moda Fabrics. And I'm really excited because I really like the bright colors. And so if you'd like to make it with me, go on out to my website and grab your layer cake, grab some background fabric out of your stash, and off we'll go. I'll see you again soon for part 2 of our next quilt. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you again really soon. Bye.